Welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh from the Wealth Stewards. In this podcast, Brent discusses some of the most important and interesting topics of the day as they relate to finance, the economy, and beyond. Now, on to the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with your host, Brent Mekosh. Brent, good to be with you again. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I am actually heading up to Vegas again tonight to see Dead & Company at the Sphere. So as soon as we get done recording this, I'll be heading up there to catch that show tonight. So
I have read great reviews on that, actually. Great reviews on that.
Yeah,
I
saw you two in the Sphere, and it was absolutely incredible. I mean, it's the venue itself it takes music and a concert performance and turns it into almost like a full body visual experience. It's pretty crazy. So I'm pretty fired up to see him.
Yeah. That's cool. So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about something I'm probably going to see a little bit of in Vegas, and that is security. I think, it's Dead & Company. Who knows what people are going to be doing up there as they're walking into that show. So I think we're probably going to have some security keeping an eye on things. But I really think this is an important topic. And, we had a guy on the podcast now, probably a year and a half or so ago, a guy named Dion Joseph, and he is an LA cop that has the Skid Row beat, and he's been down there for a couple decades. He's got, if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, Dion Joseph, anybody listening should absolutely do it. He's got about 35,000 followers. He's one of the most genuinely nicest guys you're ever going to meet, and he deeply, deeply cares about the community he's serving. And I think that in terms of law enforcement today, these guys are really in a bind. They're almost in an unwinnable situation in some cases. It's like if they don't show up, and then they haven't done enough to help the communities, but they show up and they don't use enough force, then they use too much force, and they kind of can't win. They're being defunded, and there's just a lot of things happening in the law enforcement space, which we all for sure depend on to keep this civilization running somewhat smoothly. And we're going to definitely talk about that today. I've got a guest on, Steve Seoane. He's the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Oracle State and Local Government. And he's going to talk to us about what all that means. But before we dive into what Oracle's doing and what Steve and his team are doing to help out in law enforcement, Steve, how would you like to be introduced to our audience here today?
I mean, that was great. That's my current job, so that's great. No, I'm just a passionate tech executive who found this space about 8 years ago and kind of fell in love with the problems, and it's been a great ride. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about that, because you've got a really, really diverse environment in the tech space. You were with LifeLock when I met you.
Yeah.
Before that, you were with a company called TriTech. You had a couple journeys beyond LifeLock, but even before we get to TriTech, let's get back to your childhood. Was there something in your childhood that got you interested in technology or set you on this path?
That's a good question. I think the thing that got me, I don't know that it necessarily got me interested in technology. I think the Naval Academy kind of got me interested in technology. I wound up going to school at the Naval Academy, and that's where I got exposed to a lot of it. And then my first job out was working as an engineer on a destroyer. So that's really what got me hooked on, hey, how can technology be used to solve real world problems that matter? Because that's what the Navy does a lot of times. And so it was that's probably where that got hooked, got me into it. It was probably less the childhood and more the college and the immediate postgraduate kind of experience.
Well, let's touch on that, because I think that's fascinating. What was the tech you were dealing with at the time on a destroyer? So we're probably going back to 90s, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
What was it like on the boat and being deployed, and what kind of technology, at least, were you working with at that point?
Yeah, I would say two different things on that. In the engineering plant where I worked, it was, it's old school technology. I mean, we were a gas turbine powered ship, so we had 4 GE General Electric LM2500 engines on there that we had to kind of maintain. And some of the tech in that is pretty antiquated when you think about it, even at the time, because I graduated in 1993, so I was on the ship from 94 to 97, and the tech there was probably 20 years old. But then you go up into combat or something like that, and you see modern tech and what you can see and how visual, how you can keep track of very fast moving events in real time, and then how that information can be shared with other ships on the same network and other platforms on the same network. And it was pretty eye-opening to be like, man, the possibilities. You park one ship in the middle of the the Persian Gulf, and you link it with everybody else that's kind of involved in that area, and you can see and know what's happening everywhere. And then when you come back home to San Diego, you can still get that same information through some of the systems we have on board. So it's pretty wild to think about.
So a destroyer, and I really don't know as much about this as I should. Destroyer, would this be part of a carrier group or
Could
no?
be part of a carrier group. We went over with a group, two other destroyers, or actually a cruiser and a destroyer. So we went over with a smaller group, and but yeah, normally they would be attached to a carrier or something like that, and do as a part of a carrier battle group.
And so most of your time when you were deployed, was that over in the Gulf? Is that where you spent most of
Yeah,
your?
yeah, I did one 6 month deployment to the Persian Gulf, kind of in between, as it was 94 to 90, it was kind of 95 time frame, so it was not that long after the first Gulf War. We were basically enforcing the embargo across for the Iraqi embargo.
So you get out of the Navy. What comes next for you?
So I got lucky enough to go back and teach at the academy while I was in the 3 years right before I got out. So I was teaching as an officer, and then I picked up my MBA while I was teaching, because I knew I was going to likely leave the service. Had a young family, wanted to spend a bit more time with them, and so decided to get my MBA, and then wound up going into, at the time, Capital One, which was a credit card company that was really, really small back then, and obviously has done quite well. And there, it was a kind of a first step into what business is like. And I found it was very attractive. The sort of the hiring model and the employee base there was very kind of, I think, young, smart, ambitious, working really hard to try to question assumptions, very, very rigorous analytical process, which appealed to me. So.
And did you find that jump into the corporate world from being in the military, was that kind of a shock to the system, or was it sort of a natural progression for you?
I think it was. It is definitely different. So it was a bit of a learning curve there, but I kind of got prepared for it, because even though I was teaching during the day at the academy, at night I was going to school with a bunch of executives in the Baltimore, Maryland area at University of Maryland. And we were exposed. We had everything from the head of trauma at I think Baltimore's main hospital, not Hopkins, but Baltimore's. So we had him in our class, to a bunch of consultants and a bunch of executives. And so I was able to kind of pick their brain throughout the couple of years while I was getting my MBA, and that definitely helped.
Now, did you leave Capital One after your MBA was complete?
Yeah, I wound up, so I joined Capital One right after my MBA was done. Okay. I wound up working at Capital One for about 6 years. Really enjoyed it. And then wound up getting kind of into data science back before they called it that. Back then it was just statistics. We were building credit and fraud models and things like that, and response models for credit cards, obviously, with Capital One, and kind of got involved in that. And then I wound up saying, you know what, it'd be interesting to go someplace with additional data, a lot of data from a lot of different disparate sources, and see what we could do with that. And so I wound up going to LexisNexis Risk and creating really kind of part of the founding team there for their analytic work.
Well, it's pretty interesting. You talk about your time with the Navy. You're dealing with old school with the turbines, but then you mentioned the data that's being fed between the boats. That's situ awareness, fraud detection for Capital One, situ awareness. It's all kind of like using this data to sort of figure out what the heck is going on in the world.
Yeah, for good. And I think LifeLock does the same, right, with identity theft protection and things like that. So I had an interesting kind of run there where I wound up going from Lexis to to ID Analytics, that we then sold to LifeLock. So we've had a few twists and turns along the way, and all been good. And so but that mission and purpose was there, particularly around fraud. It's one that everybody can kind of wrap your head around. It's like, hey, we want to prevent fraud. And then at LifeLock, we want to stop identity theft and things like that. Like there's a mission and purpose behind it that in retrospect really spoke to me. I don't know that I appreciated it as much in the moment, but now it's certainly, as I've matured, it's been a part of kind of my decision-making process on where I want to spend time.
And why do you think that's so important to you?
Well, I hadn't really, so I'd been in like financial tech for a while, probably about 15 years. And I took a little bit of a right turn and said, you know what, I'm going to go work at a mobile gaming company, because I wanted to get away from all the regulation and all the challenges that it took to kind of build a model. And in mobile gaming, I went to work for a company called Scopely, which was just filled with really smart people, and really is probably I would argue the most sophisticated thinker about mobile games. My kids thought it was the coolest job in the world. right? They were, this is great. Dad works at a mobile gaming company. I can play the games on my computer. We had like something like 6 or 7 number one hits in a row. So very, very successfully. But for me, at least, I found it was kind of a bipolar experience in some ways, because on the one hand, the people were amazing, and the freedom and the ability to really go deep in some interesting analytical problems in personalization and monetization and, you know, and kind of the player experience was pretty unparalleled. I mean, I still can't think of an area where you can do that better. But then on the other side, you know, what we really wanted to do was get people who like to spend money on mobile games. So I felt a little like, hey, this isn't necessarily speaking to me as much as I thought, although it was some of the smartest folks I'd ever worked with, if not the smartest folks I'd ever worked with on really interesting problems. It just, the problem we were solving was one that I couldn't really fall in love with. And so I wound up saying, you know what, this is probably not the right thing for me to keep doing. And that's how I found out public safety. I wound up going to TriTech and joining a company that was focusing on, you know, first responders technology.
And what happened there with TriTech?
We had a good run. We sold it to Bain Capital for just a little bit on TriTech. So TriTech builds the dispatch software that, you know, you think of a 911 operator, what they use to allocate resources, track resources, decide what goes where, the records management, et cetera, all the things that kind of the core operating systems for police, fire, and EMS. And we had about a little less than 30% of the law enforcement market and a little more than 50% of the fire market. So pretty big, pretty good scale. I came in as the chief technology officer. And then we wound up selling that a year and change later to Bain Capital. We merged that with some assets from Vista Equity Partners to create a company called Central Square. And it went pretty well for the first couple of years. So it's very, very fun experience. And then that's when Oracle found me. So
how did Oracle find you, and what did that look like when they reached out to you?
It was
because Oracle, I view Oracle. I mean, it's a massive company. It's been around for a long time, and you know, how did they approach you? What was that like?
Yeah, it was a good question. So I was president at Central Square, running the public safety business. So I think they probably found me on LinkedIn, like you'd expect. There was a group of executive headhunters they had there that were looking for folks, and one of the things that turns out they were pretty passionate about was they thought the local government market in particular was underserved. You know, when you think Oracle, you definitely think government work. I mean, they do a lot for like large states and federal and globally. But the local government market itself, which is really where most first responders, you know, it's where they buy their technologies, where they use their technology, et cetera, that was underserved. And if you go back to what was happening back then, you know, this was, you know, right at the start of the pandemic, right? So there was a lot happening, not just in the pandemic and health, but also in public safety, if you think about what happened with George Floyd and everything else back then. So a very interesting time for a company with the scale and competence of Oracle to say, hey, this is a problem we think is worth us investing our time in. And so I got found through a recruiter there that's still there. Thanks, Ben, for finding me. Appreciate it. And I wound up saying, hey, I want to go do this. After talking with my boss, Mike Cecilia, a little bit with Larry and a little bit with Safra, and decided, hey, this is a company that's serious, that has the scale to do it, the competence to do it, the willingness to do it, and really a track record of solving kind of industry problems everywhere from the kind of the lowest level infrastructure all the way through out. So it felt like a place to actually tackle the problem I had sort of fallen in love with. But do so in a way that really is unparalleled anyplace else.
Now, did Oracle have, and I really want to dive into what you're doing and what the vision is for what your team's doing, but did Oracle have any toe in that business yet? Or are you essentially, because you kind of went from, you know, a series of startup, smaller, very nimble companies, and now you're going, bam, Oracle. But I've always kind of viewed, you know, the little bit I know about what you're doing, it's almost like kind of a skunk works within Oracle.
Yeah, we started it. So they've done a bunch of things around, like they've done a bunch of things for the intelligence community, and then they did a little bit of, I think, a project way back with a records project for City of Chicago, but I don't think that actually, you know, wasn't a big focus at all for the company. So they sort of played around the periphery. And then if you think about they have huge businesses in, you know, telecommunications and construction and engineering and all these kind of mission critical software and services components they've been sort of doing well in. But this piece around public safety and law enforcement was really not something they had sold as an application. Oracle database is used in, just everywhere, thankfully. And so if you have big data problem, you've probably worked with Oracle, or you should be looking at Oracle if you haven't already. And so given that public safety has a lot of big data, associations with it and speed associated with it. So there's lots of people that had built on top of Oracle's database and technology. Heck, we did at TriTech. But then when you step back, they hadn't really built that application that was truly Oracle's. And so when I got brought on, one of the early questions I had with our chairman and CTO and with my boss was, is there something out there that you think we should go buy and build around? And I kind of said no. I said no. I want to build it. I think most of the technology out there isn't modern enough for what we want to go do in the vision we had. And so let's build it. And I think that got Larry pretty excited, got my boss pretty excited, and we since built it. So I was effectively employee number one into a startup at Oracle. So it's been a pretty surreal experience in the last 4 years building it up, and then now taking it to market and being live with some agencies.
So what's the vision? What's the big vision?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I think there's a couple things that I point to when I think about what we're doing and why it's different. One of the main ones is that, our belief is that the first responder market, the law enforcement market in particular, has been underserved by technology vendors for a long time. The tools they need, you kind of alluded to it earlier about the challenges they face, right? They've got to be the first responders for some pretty intractable problems in the U.S. today. The opioid crisis, the mental health crisis, et cetera, right? Typically what happens is a police officer or a deputy is kind of the first person on the scene who's got to deal with that. So what we started with was, hey, these folks are underserved, and what do they need? They need technology that they can trust is going to be there for them, right? Because that's obviously a big deal. They're 24/7, 365, and they don't get a chance to say, hey, time out, we're going to go figure something out. So it's got to be up and available and performant. It's got to be highly secure. Maybe folks in the space, or maybe folks who aren't as focused in the space like I am, don't know, but there's been a lot of ransomware attacks targeting the public sector for the last 5 years in particular, and some of that comes from technology that's unsecure, that's old, antiquated, that's in use there. But I think from a user perspective, we thought that the software could be faster, could increase situational awareness. And one thing that I think that we're doing that's quite different is bring a blended team approach to how we respond to these problems. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So remember, I go back to where I started from in the military and combat, right? There's a lot of people that are working to solve one problem, and there are people that are on scene. There are people that are monitoring sensors, et cetera, and they're all feeding that into those people that are making the decisions. If you think about a tactical operations center in the military, that's how it works. You've got surveillance drones, you've got sensors in the field, you've got communication, and as importantly, you've got a group of people that bring expertise, insight, experience to this problem, who also aren't there on the ground and in all those emotional things that happen when you're afraid for your life. You're maybe dealing with a unruly suspect or something like that. So you got all these emotions and things that cause you to make bad decisions. The military would say, hey, let's bring a blended team approach to that. What we said is, let's increase situational awareness for the officers, and let's increase situational awareness for command staff, so that we can bring supervision and better outcomes, really. So to that space. So that's really what we've been doing. So we built a dispatch software, we built an RMS software, we built mobile applications, we built a body-worn camera apparatus as well that does live streaming all the time. So we've done some pretty interesting things in the space that I think are really going to differentiate how law enforcement and how fire response and EMS response looks quite different in the future.
So you're talking basically both hardware and software?
Yeah. That was one of the appealing things about Oracle was, you need scale to do hardware and software. Most people, especially a startup, you're going to focus on the software components because that's where the opportunity tends to be. And hardware is hard, right? It is a challenge. So one of the amazing things about Oracle was that we actually said, like, you know, it would be even better than, well, let me take a step back. Body worn cameras have been a great innovation that have done things around transparency and accountability in law enforcement, in particular in the U.S. over the last, really since Ferguson. So last X number of years, that's been a big change. And everybody's now used to seeing them and expects them. And I think that's a good thing. In general, it's brought better accountability and better transparency to what actually happened in an event. What it hasn't done is really affect the outcome of the event as much.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Great. Now we know what happened, but we didn't actually help them. So what we do is we live stream in real time what that officer is seeing and doing, and then they can communicate back with that officer in real time. So somebody back in a some experienced sergeant in or lieutenant or chief sitting back at the command center can say, hey, let's maybe instead of going and kicking that door in, maybe let's sit around and call out. Maybe we hold off, everybody take a step back, take a breath, and that can happen in the moment to really change an outcome. So that's one of the things that I think is pretty important that we're doing.
So you got this muscle of Oracle behind you, obviously bringing a lot of resources to the table. People that I know that either served in the military, been in a combat situation, law enforcement people, first responders, when I've had conversations with them, there's no way for anyone to understand what they do on a day-to-day basis unless you've done it, Yeah. And so now I'm guessing you got this great idea, you got resources behind you, you've got to go sell it. Now somebody's got to buy this thing. So how did you put together the team to go out and reach these different, local municipalities and agencies that might be interested in using this stuff?
Yeah. So I was I was in some ways I was advantaged because I had worked with one of the biggest players in space and been president of it. So I knew a lot of the folks that I thought were cut from the right cloth, i.e. they had, experience and expertise in public safety, but also were forward leaning in their view of technology. So I had that. So like my head of sales is a former, SWAT operator, crimes against children detective, et cetera, for the public safety space. I've got, one of my sales leads down in Texas is a former firefighter. So we've got a fair number of that in the business. We've probably got 400. It's hard to call on any given day because we're always hiring and things like that, but we're at 400 plus years of experience on the team in public safety. And about half of that is from actually doing the job. So, but you don't just kind of go out and say, okay, if you've been a first responder, you fit the mold. It's like you've been a first responder and you understand tech and have the right vision for it. Well, that's a rare mix. We were able to find a bunch of those folks and really go out and build. You sort of pair that with the world-class engineering talent that Oracle had. So we brought in some folks, an influx of folks that maybe didn't have the public safety experience, but were true technology experts. Married those folks together. And then I think one of the best strategic decisions we made was we went out and said, you know what? That's great. We've got public safety experience on our side. We've got great technology, but I really need an agency who's active and who's in the middle of this to actually partner with us. So we lined up 5 design partners from the very beginning in the right kind of states and right sort of size and complexity. So all of them multi-agency. By that I mean you have multiple so like the sheriff's department and a city PD or something like that, and then also all of them multidiscipline. So police and fire and EMS. We had those folks join us in the process way back before we even had a product.
Okay, because I'm wondering, because if you got to go out and you speak to your clients here, I'm guessing I don't know the answer to this, but I'm thinking really highly fragmented.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are you literally on the ground in multiple states, counties, everything else, rolling out with these people, or is there a big place you can go to?
No, there's no one place you can go to get them all. And actually, in general, public safety is very local expertise. Law enforcement, in particular, is a very local thing. So you absolutely have to have sales reps in the territory that are out having those conversations with folks. Now it's a pretty defined market. You're not, you don't see a new PD start up not new cities, new counties starting up. So where they all are. That doesn't mean there's still a lot of them, 30,000 plus different agencies that you got to go talk to. So we picked 8 states that we're in today. So we're in California, Texas, Colorado, Minnesota, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. we picked those because we knew the market there, and we knew what was happening in those markets and knew that they needed it, as well as we felt like we had the right offering for those spaces. And so that's how we really segmented the market. And then so we have both, an inside sales organization that will call in and see if people are open or in the buying cycle at all. And we have actual feet on the ground reps that are out in the territories that will go and schedule time. And then there's typically a demo experience as well, where you show them what you got, and oftentimes there's an RFP, so it can be a pretty prolonged sales cycle.
And are these agencies now, are they in buying mode? Because I guess it's probably location, but you're seeing the defund the police movement that you saw sort of in the wake of 2020. That seems like it's kind of reversing now, except for maybe the most extreme cities. It seems like people are kind of getting it. It's like, all right, now we're getting crime on a level we haven't seen in a very, very long time. Maybe this didn't work as well as we thought. You know what I mean?
Well, we hoped. They hoped, but yeah.
yeah, exactly. So are you finding like now the message is the uptake on it a lot more positive? Are people really wanting to hear this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple trends going on. Number one is they're trying to move to the cloud, because they've realized that having, their own data center that, some small city PD or some small county is trying to manage, maintain, and protect is probably not the best model. They shouldn't be in the space. So they're leaning on folks like us on the Oracle side, but, they're obviously looking at folks that are sort of building on top of other platforms like AWS or really not Google as much, but like AWS or Microsoft Azure. So there's a move to the cloud that's happening. And then I would say in general, there's been a slight uptick in terms of market appetite and willingness to invest in technology. I'd say about, at any given time, about 7% of the market is shopping, is open to looking at new stuff and has a rigorous process going on. What I would say is in the states that we're in, we're starting to see, much more traction in terms of being willing, like, ooh, wait a minute, this is Oracle. This is a different thing in this space than we've ever seen before. So we're going to go and have that conversation. So we're getting a lot of opportunity to have conversations right now. We hope that turns into a lot of change, a lot of improvement for communities. Because I do think you're right on the defund movement, that it's largely kind of been, people have been sort of pivoted away from that now, which is a good thing. When we originally started, this was right when this was happening, and Larry asked me what I thought about the defund movement, and I said I thought it was wrong-headed. I think we need to increase complexity of response and increase the tools, because they need help, versus saying, hey, we want to take money away from you. It just didn't feel like the right decision, and clearly I think I would argue the jury's in on that, and we've been right. So
yeah, I would definitely say that you are, no question about that. Now, and I don't know the answer to this, the local agencies, governments, things like that, how much of this money is coming from their own tax base and how much is coming down from the feds?
There's a fair amount of federal grant funding that happens, but the vast majority is coming from local budgets. There's a little bit of federal funding, particularly around certain areas like body-worn cameras saw a pretty big investment in federal funding. And actually, it didn't even take much investment from federal funding. It was just a little bit that really kicked that, sort of tipped the window on that. Next thing everybody had to have them, which is good. I'm glad they did. And then you saw laws that get passed that way as well. So, but there isn't a ton of federal funding that's necessarily impacting us. There's more federal funding on the 911 side and the telephone side. There's a fair bit more there because of the way that's structured and the way they spend money there. But on the sort of the dispatch and RMS side, there's less of that.
And what's been the uptake when you do get an agency or local government that says, okay, let's move forward with this? I'd imagine, like any business, if you got the men and women that are on the ground, patrolling the streets, doing all the law enforcement, doing all the first responding, they're used to doing things the way that they're used to doing things. And you've got to essentially push them into new technology.
Yeah.
How is that? Is that an easy sell once they see it, or is there a struggle with that?
Actually, what we try to do, so there is absolutely a change. One of the sort of the old jokes about the space was, listen, if you talk to first responders, they hate technology. The only thing they hate worse than their technology is any change to that technology. Yeah. So they're kind of stuck, right? It's like, hey, I hate what I have, and then when you ask them what do they need, they say, hey, go build me this old system that I hate. They kind of spec it out because that's just what. So they're not software developers, they're not UX professionals, et cetera. That's just not how they're wired. So what you really have to do is have a ton of customer empathy for what they're trying to do. And then the term I always use with my team is we want to pull them to new technology. We We don't really want to push them to that. We want to pull them. We want to show them why this is faster, why this takes less effort, why this is better for them, why this means they can do all of what they do, do more of what they want to do, which is out protecting the public versus filling out paperwork. So we want to show them the tools in that perspective. And this is why it's good for you all. Not we know better, because that doesn't really work. These people know their jobs better than we do. But what we do know is what's possible and what really will work with the current state of technology today. And we bring that to them. Things like AI generated narratives, AI monitoring, body-worn cameras, you name it. Some of that stuff. Like these are folks that are invested 100% plus of their time, if there wasn't any way to get more than 100 of their time in public safety. They don't have time to think about how AI is going to affect their job. They need
you touched on my next question before I had a chance to. So, I mean, I think in terms of where we are with AI, we haven't seen anything yet. I think what's going to occur in the next 5 years across multiple businesses is going to be absolutely staggering. I mean, even in terms of my own business, I think it's really high probability that half the people in my business may not be in my business in 5 years, based on what this technology is going to bring to the table.
We'll be doing different things.
Hopefully that's the goal.
Exactly. A lot of it. So but your point is right. When it's just AI is going to impact maybe more than people suspect. And I think actually a little bit faster than people expect. Maybe not as fast as the sort of the early adopters say it's going to happen. Like I don't think we're achieving general intelligence here in the next little bit, but it's coming. And we're happy that in many ways it's here. We're doing it now.
So that's how are you bringing this to the table with people that are plugging into your systems?
Yeah, so in a couple different ways. One is streaming video in real time is awesome if you can grab insight from it. But grabbing insight from it, you can't watch 50 different cameras at the same time. No human can, even though we all kind of have these old security centers where you have a security guard looking at a bank full of monitors.
Yeah, exactly.
Really? How are they doing that? That doesn't make any sense. So I think it looks
cool though.
It looks good, but it doesn't really do anything. So using AI to track things like weapon detection, things like you're seeing that now at schools, which is good. I think you'll see that more at schools, which is good. To track actually at the parking lot for weapons, because last thing you want to do is get in the building. So things like that I think will come. For us, AI generated narratives is a big one. So in every incident, an officer has to create a narrative of what happened. Well, the way we think about it is right now, the way that narrative gets generated is essentially the officer goes to a field and there's a blank cursor. They have to write the whole thing out from scratch. Oftentimes they're looking at their notes on something, event that happened. They're trying to remember and record it and say, hey, this is what happened. This is what they said. And if you think about it, you get a lot of inaccuracies from that. You get a lot of, it's a lot of data entry that frankly people aren't that good at and they don't want to do it. So you do that. So then what do? They do shortcuts. Like they take a prior narrative of an event like that, and then they copy and paste that in. Well, that's not good either, because you forget to change things, et cetera. So what we do is we actually take all that structured and unstructured data that happens as a part of an event from all of our systems and any camera footage. We can then strip the audio out of it and everything like that. And we run it through a large language model, and we generate a narrative of this is what happened. And we do so with the right parameters around it to make sure that we've got that we've removed any bias, that we've got consistent formatting, that we've captured everything correctly, et cetera. And then you present that to the officer, who then has to edit it and attest that that's what happened. So you got to keep that piece in there as well. So it's not like the narrative, the large language model is producing the narrative. No, it basically turns the officer from an author of a report into an editor of a report. Now the editor still maintains the requirement for accuracy, et cetera. So that's kind of our model. And we're seeing that'll take about 50% of the time officers are out in the field, they're spending on paperwork. Think about, nobody, even though defund is gone, nobody wants to triple the size of their investment in public safety right now. So, there might be a few places that would, but there aren't a lot of that. So you want to make sure those folks are much more efficient. If I can basically take 50% of an officer's time and remove 80% of that activity, well, now I have a lot more police, fire, and EMS that can be out serving the public.
So basically what you're talking about is you get the visual data coming in, you've got the audio coming in as well. You probably got what's happening across back and forth from the dispatch, and maybe, the officers talking together. All this stuff gets thrown up into the LLM. It creates the narrative, comes back to the officer, and they either edit it, attest to it, say no, this is not right.
Go through it, look at it, attest to it, and say that's right. And then the other things you can do with it is we're doing there's every time we turn over another rock in the space, like, oh, that's another thing we could go do with it. Hey, that's another thing we could go do with it. But like, I'll give you an example. So if you're looking at a long body worn camera video footage from an event, I might be out talking to the victim or the victims for an hour. Well, I can use a large language model in this case to go through and insight and extract insight, like, hey, this is where they talked about this. This is where they talked about this. This is where they talked about this. So then when you go back to write your report, or you go back to do some investigating on it, you can actually hop to that point, and the system will actually already tell you, hey, this is the point where the victim described the suspect. This is the point where the victim talked about what happened. It can do what we call insight extraction and summarization, and that will then allow us to go to those specific spots and be much more efficient, even when it's not, hey, here's an AI produced narrative, but more, hey, here's how we give you tools and pointers in the existing set of video feeds or audio feeds or whatever that you can hop to.
So give me a vision of where this is in 5 years, because you mentioned obviously you've got a passion for this space. It's what took you from gaming back into this world. Yeah. If you and your team over there at Oracle can achieve everything that you want to achieve, what does this look like for an agency that's had full uptake of your capabilities 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. A few things I'd point to. One is I think they're seeing better outcomes in the day-to-day events that frankly get all too often lead to tragic incidents, right? So I think they've got, instead of a dispatch center being someplace where there's a dispatcher who's just saying send a unit and then checking back up on that unit every few minutes to make sure they're okay or whatever. Now you've got a dispatch center where you've basically got, instead of thinking of it as dispatch, think of it as dispatch command center, where you've got an ability for a seasoned operator to view and advise the team on the ground. I think you'll have drones as first responders for many incidents as well. So you'll have, if there's a call for a suspicious person, the first thing that will happen is the drone will get dispatched immediately to go take a look at that and report back and show what's happening. I think officers who roll up on scenes that are in progress will have had a chance to, kind of view relevant footage before they get there, or be told about what's happening before they get there, so that they're not kind of coming and having to take it all in and decide what to do. I think gone will be the days when they'll be turning on and off their body-worn camera. I think all that will happen in an automated way to make sure that they're actually capturing everything and make sure that they're streaming information in real time. These are some of the things that I think we'll be using drones for some really interesting things, like think about on the fire side, monitoring power lines, identifying hotspots and responding to hotspots immediately and things like that. So there'll be a lot more use of sensors in how we respond. And I think the big change will be, we'll have moved those sensors from saying, this is what happened, into this is what we were able to prevent because we knew about it in real time and react in real time. That's a pretty big technology change though, right? To go from, hey, I can now go back, download the video, view it, and see that, versus I'm streaming it in real time to people who have decision-making authority and can interact with me in the moment. Like that's a big leap.
And not only that, but once the database gets big enough, it's predictive. An officer's going to go in, there's a 22% chance this guy's going to pull a gun on you, or there's, you're going to start, I would imagine you're going to start to get that kind of insight as well.
Yeah, I do think you can get some insight onto what's likely to happen. I'm really hesitant on predictive policing because it's had some, I think the way it's been deployed in the past has been a problem. I would argue that just getting the officers back out doing their job versus in a room writing reports. So just the presence of, the availability of an extra fire apparatus or an extra unit or patrol car in an area will help. Just that presence
alone, it's going to reduce crime.
Exactly.
No question about it.
Yeah. But I also think there's going to be things like, if you think about, in our vision of what, response for something that frankly, I've had scares around this one, but school violence is one of those things we're seeing a lot of today.
Yeah.
And we have seen a lot of really since Columbine. I think those types of incidents will be the severity of those types of incidents will go down for folks that have leaned into technology. You'll have spotted the person coming into the building with something they shouldn't have. Think of an AR. You'll have then immediately integrated with the IoT locks that they have on the doors to make sure all the doors are locked and secured. You'll immediately notify law enforcement so that your school resource officer as well as your local law enforcement agencies know about it in real time. That will also then get seamlessly transmitted over to fire, who says, hey, we probably want to roll somebody just in case. So there'll be a lot of that, I think, that will happen. And so some of these tragic incidents won't have as much severity when they happen.
Well, I certainly hope so, because I think that, the veneer of civilization that we have is a lot thinner than most people would like to believe. And you've got these men and women that are out there every day sort of making sure that it's a cliche about the thin blue line, but it's really true. It's really true. I mean, without these people, our society for sure looks a lot more like a lot more chaotic and a lot more like Mad Max than it does what we're used to. So if people are listening to this and they're curious about what you're doing with
on that point, Brent, sorry to interrupt. But on that point, you started with this is like what we ask these folks to do is really, really challenging.
Yes.
I would actually say we put them in unfair situations every day. We ask a law enforcement officer to roll up and immediately figure out what's happening with somebody who's either on something, experiencing a mental issue, et cetera, and they're supposed to respond and be right 100% of the time. Like that's a kind of a very difficult paradigm. I don't think those macro problems are going to go away, but what we need to do is give them better tools so they can do a better job in that. So I do think that's because you're right. The veneer is, I think people are starting to wake up to how thin it is. And I think people are also starting to understand how challenging it is to understand, hey, this is somebody who's homeless and going through a tough time right now versus somebody who's going to get violent in the moment, right? That's a very, very fast snap judgment you're going to have to make to avoid having them be able to hurt you or anybody else around you.
Well, I think it's awesome that you guys are giving people the tools to do that much more effectively. If anyone's listened to this and they want to know more about what you're working on, how to reach Oracle, how to reach you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, Oracle Local Government, you can go to oracle.com, obviously, look up, we have a local government page. View. There's been a bunch of content we've shared on LinkedIn as well of videos and things like that. So please, if you're on LinkedIn, just reach out to me directly. I'll make sure you get to the right person. If you're in any different model, just hit oracle.com and reach out to us that way.
Awesome. Steve, thanks, man. This is a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brent.
Yeah, really interesting topic, really interesting conversation. I just want to ask one really quick question, Steve.
Yeah.
I have friends who are police officers in law enforcement at different levels. I can understand they're like, we need something different, but we don't want anything different kind of attitude. I understand.
It's a learning curve, right? I mean, like it's hard.
I know this one, okay? I know this one. It may be bad, but I know that one.
Yeah, but exactly. I know exactly how it works.
Yeah. I'm curious, though, you didn't really touch on this. What's been the reaction to civic leaders, the people who decide these budgets and who allocate this money? What has their reaction been to this?
I think they've been very supportive about really understanding, like, it's so great that you guys are interested in coming into this space. They've been looking for this for a while because they've just had like the choices weren't great before that. There weren't a group of companies that you point to and say, hey, these are folks that we want to invest 15, 20 years of our community's safety in.
Yeah.
So I think that's been one good thing. The other thing is, like, wait a minute, that's possible? You can do that? Yeah, we can do that now. Because they're pretty jaded on like everything you see on TV at night in some of these crime dramas and things like that. That doesn't really exist. Like none of that stuff actually exists. They kind of know that. And now they're like, wait a minute, you can actually do that right now. And when I show them, they're first thing they're like, wait a minute, is that real? And then for us at least, oftentimes it's streaming in real time. So we'll show them their footage of their, our cameras today in their environment, and they can see themselves moving around. They're like, wait a minute, this is all real? Yep, it's all real. And so they're a little bit kind of blown away by that. They do tend to think, hey, this is going to be too expensive, but we've been very clear on we're at or below market rate in most of in the markets we're in. So we're really trying to be pretty compelling in terms of the value prop.
Yeah, yeah. I think people need to understand that talk about reformation in law enforcement is one thing.
Yeah.
Defunding it is an entirely different thing, entirely having nothing to do with reformation. You
No,
know, Brent, as always, man, you have the greatest guest. I love just sitting here listening to these conversations. Um,
yeah.
it's terrific. It's Steve, thank you. And Brent, for people who are listening to this who want to get a hold of you, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, phone number in here is 602-255-0555. Pretty active on LinkedIn. I post stuff up there almost every single day. Website is tws.finance or smartmoneysimplified.com. And both those pages pretty much have every way conceivable to contact me. So yeah, if this piqued anyone's interest and you want to talk more about it, I'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah. And if they just like to have a conversation with you about you as a financial advisor, I would encourage them to do that.
Always open for that conversation as well.
I hope so. I hope so. And for those of you who are listening to this conversation in this podcast for the first time who are not subscribers, the other thing you can do is really easy. You hit the follow button. That's simple. Then you're a subscriber. And then every time Brent drops a new episode of his podcast, which always are compelling, I promise you, really, you'll be notified. You can listen to it and you can enjoy it. And if you do enjoy it, if you do find it useful, you find it valuable to yourself, please tell people about it, because word of mouth is just the best promotional tool that there is. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. I'm Bill Tucker on behalf of Brent and everybody at TWS. I'm reminding you to go out today and make today a great day or not. It's a choice. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to Smart Money Simplified. Have questions about topics covered during the show? Visit our website at www.smartmoneysimplified.com or give us a call at 602-255-0555. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the wealth stewards or concurrent investment advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.